Okay, so now I'm kind of going to zoom through the tax portion of last week's lecture, and then we're going to go through actual tax problems so that you can kind of flesh out exactly what we did. So by virtue of going through the examples, I think that'll kind of refresh your memory. Okay. So there are different types of taxes: lump sum, excise, and ad valorem. A lump sum is just a straight flat amount given to some population or whatever. And excise will be per unit, so a quantity-based tax. And ad valorem will be per amount. Okay, a tax on value. So that'll be quantity, but it'll also be quantity times price, essentially. So the total dollars of the transaction. Okay, so we are going to deal with excise taxes in this class. Okay, so we said that if there's a tax on producers, what that's going to do is it's going to shift up the supply curve by the amount of the tax. Okay, and what does that do? It creates a kind of a disjoint. So it increases the equilibrium price to P prime, but it also decreases the amount that that producers receive. So it's almost like they get a second price. Okay, so P prime is the actual price. It's the price that consumers pay and that the producers charge. But after tax, the amount that producers get is going to be lower because they have to pay the tax per quantity. And what this does is it creates a burden, so to speak, on both producers and consumers, where producers have to physically pay the tax, and consumers have to face an increase of the price that wouldn't be there in the absence of a tax. So consumers end up losing some consumer surplus. Producers end up losing some producer surplus as a result of the tax. Okay, and we call that the tax burden, right? So this area here, this striped line, is the total tax revenue. It's the quantity sold times the tax. Okay, you can also call it the total tax burden. But basically, if the tax is $1, P prime to P prime minus 1 is going to be the length of the tax. Q prime is going to be the new quantity, the new equilibrium quantity. So this area here is going to represent the tax revenue, quantity times the tax. Okay, if you're selling, if you're charging a tax for $1 for every unit, then 1 times the quantity sold is going to be the amount of the tax. Okay, of this tax revenue, this much used to be consumer surplus, right? This used to be consumer surplus. So this top portion of the tax revenue is the consumer tax burden. And likewise, this portion here used to be producer surplus, but now only the bottom half of tax revenue is going to be producer tax burden, okay? So what remains in consumer surplus? This triangle between the price that consumers face and the demand curve, right? So remember, consumer surplus is the difference between the demand curve and the price paid. Okay, so willingness to pay minus price paid. Oh, where did I go? Willingness to pay minus price paid. Come on. Geez Louise. Willingness to pay minus price paid is going to be the consumer surplus. Okay, and this is the price consumers actually pay. Okay, so this triangle here is going to be your consumer surplus. This triangle here is going to be your producer surplus. The price that producers receive after taxes minus the supply curve. Okay, so it's going to be this. And then, so we have this is producer surplus, this is producer tax burden, this is consumer tax burden, this is consumer surplus. We also said that this whole thing, consumer tax burden plus producer tax burden, can be called the total tax burden. It's also the total tax revenue. Okay, that leaves these two triangles. Come on, pointer, stay. That leaves these two triangles here that are unaccounted for. Okay, this is what we call the deadweight loss. We saw deadweight loss with the price controls. Similarly, there's deadweight loss when you have a tax burden, or tax in general. Okay, by virtue of shifting from Q star down here, the old equilibrium quantity, to Q prime, the new equilibrium quantity, we have decreased the number of total transactions in the market. You cannot get consumer surplus or producer surplus on things that you're not consuming or producing, right? It's obvious, right? You can only get consumer surplus on the things that you consume, and you can only get producer surplus on the things that you produce. Well, guess what? Everything from here to here is no longer being produced or consumed. So this area, the top triangle, used to be consumer surplus, but there's nothing there being consumed. So this area is part of deadweight loss. That used to be consumer surplus. And this area is deadweight loss that used to be producer surplus, things that were being produced that are not getting any producer surplus anymore. Okay, so that's also deadweight loss. So this total triangle is deadweight loss. Okay. So down here, producer surplus, producer tax burden, consumer surplus. This whole triangle, or this whole rectangle, is tax revenue or tax burden. This and this are your deadweight losses from consumers and from producers, respectively. P prime is the price that consumers pay. P prime minus the tax, or P prime minus 1 in this case, will be the price that producers receive after taxes. P star is your old equilibrium price. Q star is your old equilibrium quantity. Q prime is your new equilibrium quantity. S prime is your new supply curve after taxes. S is your old supply curve, and D is your demand curve regardless. Okay. So this is a tax on producers. All right. I think that's everything. Let's say I ask you to find the equilibrium price. Okay, so you would just shift up your tax. Actually, we're going to solve that now. So, let's just go right into it. All right. So here's that graph again with the consumer tax burden and producer tax burden broken out. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you this here. So we have a demand and supply on soda given by these equations, and we're going to find the equilibrium price and quantity as normal, so before tax. So let's pull up the whiteboard. Okay, so we have P equals, what do we have P equal to? Oh, this is very far down. P equals 40 minus QD. P equals 8 plus QS, 3QS. So I'm going to solve them. So what do I do to solve them? This is a regular, before the tax is ever implemented, so this is regular old equilibrium. What am I going to do? I'm going to set QD equal to QS. So now I have P equals 40. Let's break it down. P equals 40 minus Q, and I'm going to set them both equal to Q star. 40 minus Q star, P equals 8 plus 3Q star. So now I have a system of two equations with two unknowns, Q star and P. So I'm going to solve this system of equations now that I can. And what I particularly want to do is I'm going to set them equal to each other. 40 minus Q star is equal to 8 plus 3Q star. Okay, and I can do that because P is equal to P, like P equals P star. We have the same thing on both sides of the equation here. Okay, subtract 8 from both sides, you get 32. Add Q star to both sides. This will be minus Q star plus Q star. So I have 32 equals, and then I subtracted 8 from both sides, so the 8s are going to go away. I added Q star to both sides, so it's going to be 4 Q star. So I have, now I'm going to divide both sides by 4. Q star equals 8. Okay. And then I can plug Q star equal to 8 into either the supply equation or the demand equation, or both. I'm going to do both and just check my work. Okay, so I have P equals 40 minus 8, so equals 32, easy enough. Double check it, P equals, now I'm going to put it into the supply equation, 8 plus 3 times 8. So that's going to be P equals 8 plus 24 is equal to 32. So, you know I'm right, because it's both. It's a coherent system because you have one P and one Q. So Q star equals 8, P star equals 32. All right. So we found the equilibrium price and quantity, 8 and 32. All right, now suppose the government implements a tax on consumers. Before I do that, I just want to do the old demand, old supply, or old consumer surplus, old producer surplus. So what's my y-intercept for the demand curve? Before that, what goes on the x-axis? Quantity. What goes on the y-axis? Price. What's the y-intercept for the demand equation? We can see it right here, 40, because it's already in slope-intercept form. If you have trouble with that, come see me at office hours, okay? What's the y-intercept for the supply equation? Well, it's going to be 8, right? That's just from here. Okay, so then I don't draw to scale, so I'm not going to bother with the slopes, even though they're -1 and 3 respectively. But you have your supply equation sloping upwards, your demand equation sloping downwards. And then I can label the equilibrium quantity, Q star, as being 8. And we found that down here. And equilibrium price, P star is, oh, hey, that's a 3, but it's gross. Both, that's gross. I'm going to try that again. All right. See if I can fare better now. All right, so we have 32. This will be your consumer surplus between the demand and the equilibrium price. This will be your producer surplus. Okay. So consumer surplus is going to be 1/2 base times height. Base times height. If this is going too fast for you, I would suggest going back to the old lectures, because this should be, this should be something that you should be able to do in your sleep now, because you've seen a bunch of consumer surplus, a bunch of producer surplus, and this isn't with the tax yet, so it should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so what's the base? It's going to be, 1/2. What's the base? The base is going to be 8, right, your quantity. What's the height? It's going to be your 40 minus your 32, so that's going to be 8 as well. So your consumer surplus is going to be 32. Producer surplus is going to be the same. I wish that it would stop cutting me off at the bottom there. It's mad annoying. All right. So base times height equals 1/2. What's your base? Your base is 8 again, right? The length is 8. What about your height? It's going to be 32 minus 8, so 24. So the consumer surplus should be 96. So then finally, what's your total surplus? It's going to be 32 plus 96 equals 128. All right. If you don't get that, let me know. Come to office hours, if this is not making any sense. If you need to slow down the video and rewatch it, that's fine too. But if you don't understand fundamentally how to calculate this, that's kind of an issue. So make sure that you're capable of doing that, and I'm here to help you. Okay. So now suppose the government implements a $4 tax on consumers. Okay. So what happens when the government implements a $4 tax on consumers? Okay, so this is on consumers, right? Not on producers. So let's see if I can copy this graph over. Not good enough. Maybe even better. Okay, so a $4 tax on consumers. So think about that. You are, let's say you're willing to pay, you're this first consumer, you're willing to pay 40, okay, for the good. If you're willing to pay 40 for the good, and you know of that 40, $4 is immediately going to the government, in reality, you're really willing to pay $36 for the good itself, right? $4 is going to go to tax, so you're paying $36 for the good, and you're going to pay $4 later to the government. Okay, so this is actually going to shift your willingness to pay down. Okay, so I'm going to use this magenta pen over here. Oh. I'm going to use magenta to be the new demand curve. So my demand, D prime, is essentially shifted down by 8. So D prime equals D minus 8. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, but not by 8, by 4, the amount of the tax. D minus 4. Okay. So this should be 36. Okay. So essentially, I pay 36 to the producer, and I pay $4 later to the government. Okay. So my willingness to pay is going to be the same, essentially, but what I'm actually paying for the good up front is going to be lower, because I have to pay some of that to the government. Let me erase these random markings that I have here. Okay. So if my demand is shifted down by 4, take a look at the graph. What's the new equation? Well, the slope's not going to change, but I'm paying some amount to the government. My new y-intercept is 36, right? Just like we showed you. All right, so other than that, it's going to be the same problem. I just got to follow the same steps, solve for the new equilibrium quantity. So 36 is going to be my new price here, and then I'm going to have 36 over here. 36 minus 8 isn't 32 anymore. It's going to be 28. And my equilibrium quantity is going to be Q star. I'm going to call Q star Q prime just to be, just so we're not using the same variable as before. Okay. And I'm going to call P, I'm going to call it P prime now as well. And just to double check, if I have 36 minus 7, my equilibrium price is going to be 29. And if I have 8 plus 3 times 7, the equilibrium price is going to be 29. So P prime is 29, Q prime is 7. Okay. So the old one was 8, new one is 7. Okay. Old one was 32. New one is 29. So 29 is the price that consumers pay to producers. Okay. But they also pay $4 in tax. So if I go up here, and sorry that this isn't drawn to scale, and I add the tax back, this should be 33. So the demand curve should have been a little bit above here, just the way that I drew it. It's definitely not the scale. So I guess, see if I can fix that somehow. And I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to live with the fact that, there we go, that's better. So it's not parallel anymore, but I guess I'd rather it be not parallel, but still have the intercept in the right place. So 36 was the old intercept. 32 is the new intercept. What was the old equilibrium? I'm sorry, 36 is the new intercept. Let me try this again. Because now I've confused myself. Okay, so the old intercept was 40, now it's 36. The after-tax price that consumers pay per good in total is 33. The old equilibrium was 32. And the price that producers receive per good, which is also the price that consumers pay up front, is going to be 29. Okay. So there we go. I have them all labeled now for you to see. So 29 is what we solved for. That is the actual intersection between the demand curve and the supply curve. Okay. 7 is the equilibrium quantity. 8 was the old equilibrium quantity. 32 is the old equilibrium price that we saw from the last one. 33 is just going to be your, let's call it P prime, let's call it P double prime equals 29 plus tax equals 33, because the tax was equal to 4. Okay, so that's going to be what the consumers actually pay per good once they're done paying their taxes. Okay, 36 is the old, or the new intercept, and 40 is the old intercept. Okay, so I like to give the 29 and I like to give the 33 a name. Okay, so 29, let me do this on another one. So I typically call 29 the P prod and 33 the P cons, regardless of whether the tax is, because, let me write this down, because regardless of whether the tax is on producers or consumers, at the end of the day, when all taxes are paid, producers receive $29 and consumers pay $33. Okay. So that's why 29 would be your P prod and 33 is P cons. And the reason it's helpful is that, like, when you're doing the producer and consumer surplus, you want to know what the P cons is and what the P prod is. And you want to be able to solve, like, use them to solve for it. So regardless of whether the tax is on producers or consumers, it's going to be P cons is always going to be the higher number, and P prod is always going to be the lower number, and one of them is always going to be equal to, or P cons is always going to be equal to P prod plus tax. Okay. Even if the tax is on producers, or even if the tax is on consumers, because you can just rewrite that P cons minus tax equals P prod. So that's what you would have in this case. The consumers are basically subtracting the tax from their willingness to pay, essentially. All right. So let's say we wanted to calculate consumer surplus. So let me label a little bit. So I have A over here, B, stop moving like that, just go where I put you, stop trying to snap to the grid. All right, fine. B is this triangle, this rectangle in here. C is the rectangle above it. E is there. I wish it would stop doing that. There we go. F is there. And then G is there. All right, so from the last one, we said old consumer surplus equals E plus C plus F. New consumer surplus is what? Is it E, C, and F? No, because consumers are paying 33. Okay, so it's just going to be E. Okay, the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay, 33. Old producer surplus was A plus B plus G. Now wasn't it? New producer surplus is just A, because they're only getting $29 per good. Okay. Old total surplus, A plus B plus C plus D plus F. Oh, sorry. A plus C plus E plus F plus G. New total surplus is what? It's just A plus E. Tax burden is going to be your C plus B. Oh, come on. AKA tax revenue. You can call it whatever, it's the same thing. Consumer tax burden is going to be the part of the tax burden that's borne by consumers that used to be consumer surplus. So what's that? If you're looking at it, it's just going to be C. Producer tax burden is what? Is B, right? That's the part of tax burden that used to be part of producers, but now is a tax burden. And your deadweight loss is going to be F plus G, okay? Of which F used to come from consumers and G used to come from producers. Okay, so if you wanted to solve this, what you could do is just find the areas, the different areas that you have. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this over so that it's still there, and then I'm gonna fill in these areas. Okay, so E plus C plus F is 1/2 base times height. Right? And the base used to be, well, I guess we already saw this, but the base used to be 8. The height is 40 minus 32, which was 8. I'm not going to resolve these ones again. So old consumer surplus is 32. Old producer surplus was 96. And old total surplus was 128. And that's just from before up here. Oh, sorry, up here. Okay. What's the new consumer surplus? Well, it's E, okay, going from 40 to 33 and from 0 to 7. So 1/2 40 to 33 times 7. So that's going to be 7 times 7 times 1/2. That should be 24.5. Half of 49. Sorry. Ah, come on. Just trying to move over a little bit. Okay. What's the new producer surplus? The base is going to be going from 29 to 8. So 1/2, 21. What is the height? Sorry, that was the height. What is the base? It's going to go from 0 to 7. So 7. So you're going to have 3.5 times 21, and I cannot do that in my head. So we're going to pull up the calculator. 3.5 times 21, 73.5. Oh, sorry. Where did I do that? Okay, so what's the new total surplus? It's going to be your 24.5 plus 73.5. 24.5 plus 73.5 is 98. Okay, so your deadweight loss should equal 30, because 128 minus 98, old minus new total surplus. But I want to double check that by actually finding the area for F and G. Okay, what's your tax burden? That'll be C plus B. So that's a rectangle, so it's just going to be length times width. Length is 7. Or sorry, width is 7. Length is 29 minus, so 33 minus 29, which is 4. So your tax burden or your tax revenue is going to be 28. I just want it on the same line. There we go. This should be then 2, right? Sorry, I forgot to take the tax revenue out from my total surplus, my old minus new total surplus. Okay. Because tax revenue won't be included in total surplus the way that I typically calculate it. What's left? So tax burden, that's part of the consumers, is going to be from 33 to 32 times 7. So that should be 7. So this should be 21, 32 to 29. So that's minus 3. The base is 3. So, or base is 7. So 3 times 7 is 21. And you can double check that. 7 plus 21 is 28. So I have the right tax burden breakdown. And then finally, if I calculate the area for F plus G, it should be equal to 2, because DWL plus tax burden plus new total surplus should equal your old total surplus. Okay. Because if we looked at it again, we had F plus G plus C plus B plus A plus E should be A plus B plus C plus E plus F plus G, A, B, C, E, F, G. There you go. Sorry, I just threw a lot of letters at you real fast. But what I'm saying is that A plus E, C plus B, F plus G should equal this here, the total surplus over here. Okay. And what do we got? We got, do we get 2? So the base of this triangle is going to be going from 7 to 8, so it's going to be 1. So 1/2. Base is going to be 1. What's the height? It's going from 33 to 29, the amount of the tax. So that'll be 4. So 1/2 times 4 is 2. Boom, it all adds up. Okay, so we have an internally consistent, all of our answers are internally consistent. They all make sense and they all align with each other. So this is the full answer. This is we have the equilibrium quantity with the tax is 7. We have the equilibrium price for producers, which I call P prod, is equal to 29. P cons, the equilibrium price for consumers, is 33, which even though the consumers are paying 29, in reality, they're also paying an additional $4 per unit in tax. Okay. I think that's everything. Okay. So note that the height of the tax revenue rectangle is always going to be the amount of the tax, and the base is always going to be the quantity. Okay. So the tax was 4, so this area is going to be 4, or this height is going to be 4. Okay. What else? Any other takeaways? No. I think that's essentially the solution there. So let me. I want just regular arrow. There we go. So how did demand and supply change? We said demand shifts down by 4. What is the new demand equation? It's going to be 36 minus QD, because it's going to be shifting down by 4. Then we found the new equilibrium by replacing this equation in for this equation down here. Okay, and that gave us the price that consumers pay before the tax. We added 4 to get the price producers pay after the tax. I'm saying producers, I mean consumers. Right? So we can see that visually. It's always, with these tax equations, with these tax questions, always graph it so that you can see that you're adding 4 to the tax, 4 to this intersection here, and not subtracting it. Okay? So if you had found pecans, then you would have a pecan pie. If you had found pecans, the price that consumers pay up here, and you added 4, you would have done something wrong. So you just want to make sure that you know, am I adding 4 or am I subtracting 4 from am I adding 4 to P prod, or am I subtracting 4 to pecans? You can only see that visually. Or not that you can only see it visually, but I need it visually, so I would imagine you guys need it visually too. Okay. So just to recap, tax on consumers, you're going to decrease the demand curve because consumers are going to have essentially a lower willingness to pay for the good itself because they're factoring in the fact that they have to pay a tax. Okay. For a tax on producers, you're going to shift the supply curve up, right? If you're shifting the supply curve up, then when you solve for the equilibrium, you're solving for what I call the pecans, this number up here, the 33. Okay. And the reason that you shift the supply curve up is because per unit, you're going to want to make the suppliers as well off selling as they did before the tax. So essentially the producers are shifting some of the tax burden onto consumers by increasing the price. Okay. So 729 is the new equilibrium. What is the burden on producers and on consumers? So consumer tax burden was 7, producer tax burden is 21. There it is right there. This is a much neater graph than I had drawn But there you go. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I suggest if you thought that I went too fast, you go back, you rewatch how I solved everything. It isn't actually complicated, but there's like a lot of steps there. But essentially all you're doing is if it's on consumers, you're shifting the demand curve down. If it's on producers, you're shifting the supply curve up. And then by doing so, you're going to be changing the equation to add 4 to the supply curve or subtract 4 from the demand curve. And then you're just resolving the same system of equations and, I would redo the drawing, and then, then it's just a matter of an exercising solving for areas, which you should know how to do. So it's not too complicated, but like I said, there's a lot to solve for. So, you do have to be a little bit careful. So go back, I'd say rewatch what I just showed you, and then repeat this exercise. So the equations are going to be the same, 40 minus QD, 8 plus 3QS, but now instead of being a $4 tax on consumers, we have a $4 tax on producers. Solve it in your notebooks. I'm going to test you on Blackboard, obviously ungraded, but solve it, see what you get, and then we'll reconvene. Okay.